Good evening, everyone. It is an honor to interview both of you. We all know Joe, the public figure, but you know Joe, the husband, the father. Give us a sense of Joe, the person, and how he was distinct from the Joe that we all know.
Well, I just want to say, okay, after that film, after seeing it again, and I've probably seen it 5 times or 4 times, I don't know, but it moves me. It really does, and I feel Joe's presence, and missing him tells somewhat about him in that he was my love, he was my boyfriend, he was my friend, all this stuff that I tell so many people. They're getting bored hearing it. But I've been very lucky, and what has been amazing about Joey is that you can see that personal person even when he was public, and that made him very special. So I was lucky.
Yeah, that was really the thing that was remarkable about him. Rabbi Krause talked about us. We have the ark behind us, and in the Bible, the ark remarkably is gilded on the outside and also on the inside where no one sees. And this leads to a rabbinic comment that great people their insides are like their outsides. And he was always like that. I remember at the Shiva, many people coming over to us and saying, oh, this must be so hard for you. He's a public figure, and yet this is your private mourning. And I would say to them repeatedly, no, he was the same to the doorman as he was to us, as he was to the person on the street. So it was almost like, I know what you're going through in this moment. And that really captured him.
When I think of Senator Lieberman, the word that comes to mind is courage. Like, he had the courage to stand up for what he believed was right, even if it meant standing alone, even if it meant facing ostracism and criticism from his own party. Was he as fearless in private as he was in public?
Talk about his stubbornness.
I would say he was strong all the time, and his opinions were voiced sometimes, and sometimes they were not voiced. And probably it might have been too tough to voice them to some of the people he meant them for. But he was strong, and he knew what he believed in, and he didn't do things he didn't want to do. He didn't believe in. So we had to suffer the consequences sometimes.
Yeah, but he was right there for you. When I was a kid, I was in school up in Connecticut after being at SAR for 3 years till 2nd grade.
Thank you for setting the record straight.
Exactly. But there were kids in my class who bullied me for a number of years. And he would sort of hear me complain about this, some nights cry about it, and he would say, I'm going to go and, knock those kids upside the head, etc. Fortunately for his political career, he never did that. But you just had this sense of he was going to stand with you if you needed his support and for what was right.
Joe spent 40 years of his life in politics, and yet he was cheerful. And I never quite, and I don't mean to denigrate my own profession, but I feel like to be an elected official is to be bitterly disappointed and burned and often betrayed by the worst of human nature. And what I find so compelling about Joe is that he was relentlessly hopeful and cheerful, and he managed to be a profoundly decent person in what is often an indecent profession. What was the secret to his success?
I'll just jump in and then you can reflect. I think one of the things I'll reflect as my mother's son, and as someone who was very lucky for him to come into my life as a parent when I was 6, taught me to ride a bike, lots of things. It was a little bit like when I first met him, it was and Booby, my mother's mother, was also like this. Is this guy for real? Right? That can't be. That's got to be fake. No one's that positive. No one's that optimistic all the time. And he was this preternatural optimist. And if you didn't have like his brain chemistry, you could not fully understand it. And I think sometimes, let's just say, I'll say generously, I would not rank you top of the world's optimists. And the two of you together were a sort of study in how does a realistic view of the world meet an optimistic determination to do something about it. And that was always amazing to see.
Mommy always used to say, is he really this nice? Is this real? Because it was before I married him. And, she just wanted to make sure that that was real. So I didn't know what to say to her. He seemed real to me. But I guess, we had to cope with, we both had been divorced and taking on each other's children. My one child and his two children was a big, amazing effort. And one of the books I authored had a chapter on that specifically, that's one of the greatest challenges. And what I felt very strongly about all the time was it's important to treat children as children and not use stepchildren. I hated that word. And I know it's good for some, but I didn't like it. And I didn't want anyone to think stepmother with me. I'm the mother, and maybe a different category of the mother and the step, but really closely, so much that the kids feel that, and I feel it. And that's very important. And that's hard. That's one of the things I most praise myself about.
I just want to defend pessimism for a moment. You're either proven right or pleasantly surprised, so it's a win-win. I recently ran into a colleague of mine who lost a high-profile Senate race, and I asked him how he was feeling. And he said, it's like I lost a child. I mean, he was visibly grieved, and it just reminds you that losing an election takes an emotional toll. In 2006, Joe lost his Democratic primary, but then launched an independent bid and won against all odds. What was that period like for the family? What was it like when he lost? What was it like when he decided to run as an independent? And then what was it like when he overcame the odds and won a victory that very few people thought he would pull off?
That was, yes, because I remember how he was looking at people at an event, I forget which one it was, and he said to me under his breath, oh, because these were all people he supported and who loved him. And yet, the Iraq War, whatever, the negative was they were now supporting someone else. And that really hurt Joe, because he said, oh my God, I couldn't have done any more. So it was surprising. And he felt that way very strongly. And then he had to go through that experience and be hurt and get over it. You can't feel that way forever in politics. You've got to end it and move forward, because that's politics. You're always, I was always surprised that Joey, such a nice guy, but there were people who I wouldn't choose to befriend certain people who were nasty. And he had to put up with that politically. But he did. He just went forward. And I think that's important to be a successful politician.
Yeah, I remember that time. I was away. I was out of the country. I was studying to be a rabbi on a remote hilltop in northern Israel, and we were watching what it was. There was the internet, but it wasn't like now. You weren't getting streaming videos all the time, and
I don't think there was YouTube.
yeah, exactly. It was pre-YouTube, and I do remember coming back. I mean, to me, actually, the biggest marker of this was they moved out of my childhood home in New Haven and relocated to Stamford. And it was ostensibly, on the surface, like, well, this makes more sense, and you're moving back to New York, and we'll be closer. But I could tell there was a hurt there. There was a sense that, like, the New Haven community that had launched his political career had not been with him at that stage, and there was a kind of going home to Stamford and shifting venues. But as my mother said, you move forward. He did not carry or nurse resentment, grudges. I really never heard him say a bad thing about anyone, which is more remarkable, I'd say, than being an optimist, right? When you're in the world of politics. People he disagreed with, he'd be disappointed, but moved forward.
He was the consummate mensch. Joe spent 40 years of his life in public service, including 24 years in the Senate. When history looks back at the public service of Joe Lieberman, what do you hope that most people will remember him for?
I'll jump in with something, and then you'll share. Part of the thing I find so remarkable about the film, and different people have different reactions to it, but to see the sort of parade of bipartisan legislative moments where he is hugging presidents of different parties, and with a record that is sort of unimaginable that you would cobble together now. Congressman Torres, you may make a run for it, but the others in the field now that you would imagine that the person who was passionate about the Clean Air Act was also founding the Department of Homeland Security, was also ending Don't Ask, Don't Tell. These are things that, well, you can't be for one of those without being the other. And the sense, it was another aspect of the moving forward. It was, well, what's the next challenge? And who's the shifting coalition that might support this? And so I think to be remembered for, here was someone who came to the Senate and really looked for, how can I make a difference with whatever is the coalition that emerges, right, around this issue? I think it did require courage. It required an environment that makes that possible. One of the things that's painful for me about the film is I don't know how much to read the film as inspirational direction for how we should carry ourselves today, and how much to read it as a period piece. Could he have been elected in the age of Twitter? I don't know, right? I honestly don't know. I don't know what you think back when you think about accomplishments that you saw him pursue.
Well, I think obviously he was using bipartisan as a description. It almost doesn't feel like it's more than bipartisan. It was a human, friendly, rational, acceptable way to deal with people. And he believed in that. I would say, looking at things today, I wonder how he would have seen himself through. But simultaneously, he always did it, no matter what happened. And you normally say, oh, Joey, is that gonna work? And he would make it work. So I would say he would make today work too, but with pain at what he was writing by some people. But everybody's sort of been transpired by this narrowness. And these are, people I love and I'm close with, they've all become a little narrow. But I can't tell people that I love narrow. But there's a narrowness that's happened where people are just thinking, oh, I don't think that way. So you don't sit down at a table and have a cup of coffee. It's ridiculous. That's narrow. That's small. And what is happening is that different circles are getting stupider and limited. They can't help make leaders right decisions.
We all live in a bubble.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. We'll see. But speaking, the world, you said, would Joe be elected in the world of TikTok and Twitter? I imagine the world would be utterly unrecognizable to Joe. Right? We see anti-Semitic incidents are at historic highs. U.S.-Israel relationship is facing unprecedented challenges, not only from the far left, but also from the far right. We're about to have like a Senate candidate with a Nazi tattoo, and then a House candidate who called for the internment of Zionists. Like, how would Joe respond to this moment?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just talking to you. I forgot I was here. It's so aggravating, upsetting, and a lot of those people would not have voted for Joe. They wouldn't have connected to someone like him. That's what I mean about the narrowness that's happening. They don't even know those differences in people. They don't respect it. And there is a different person out there that you have to be mindful of I can't say that Joe he would have worked toward getting to know them or having them who knows. It might have been groups of people that would have no interest in him. They're not interested in anything but their own line of thinking. And it is limited and stupid.
It's really hard to know. I've thought about it a lot, which is how would he respond to the moment, or how would he make the case, to someone who wasn't convinced or who was in a more hostile stance. I do think he would have, he saw, as my mother said, he saw the things he saw clearly, right? And a lot of times people think about it, bipartisanship or compromise or coalition building is, well, that's for people who don't care that much about any particular worldview. You just got to get something done. And that was very much not him. He cared deeply about a number of things, and then it was, well, given that I care about this, how can I make it happen? There are things that would have been true, right, for him, and he would have tried to say it as clearly as he could. Like, no matter how many mistakes the Israeli government makes, the Iranians are the bad guys. Right? He would have felt that in a very clear way. The sense of, well, when you criticize or when you engage, when you maybe have a critique of the idea of Zionism, what is your alternative? What are you actually proposing that has any kind of hope or promise for the future? And we know so much of the discourse right now is just people yelling, and there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of hate. There's not necessarily reasoned, constructive discourse. I don't know how well that would have sold, right? But I think he would have tried to keep people focused on core issues like democracy. Israel's about to have another election. It's another moment for Israelis to step up, to figure out what their next step is. And we have to, as Americans, remember that that's what we're in this for, to try to bring the world to a more constructive place. And as a Jew, he certainly would have felt, and did feel very strongly and unambiguously that Israel was fundamentally, in the long arc of Jewish history, a blessed and necessary development in Jewish history. And you got to rise to the moment and make it be what it needs to be.
I've heard from Jewish friends of mine, I have a few of them, but the climate of fear is so palpable that I know Jews who are thinking twice before wearing a kippah or displaying the Star of David, or wondering, are we witnessing the Europeanization of American anti-Semitism? One thing that struck me about Joe is he never ran away from his Judaism. He never hid his Judaism. He leaned into it. He was proud. He was visible. It was central to his political identity. Can you speak about that?
Well, Joe was a proud Jew, and he was an American Jew, and believed in his history, but also knew and was totally part of the American dialogue and history. So that, and Joey's Judaism was something, he was Jewish. And yes, that's something he does. He goes to the synagogue. They have prayers that are different. He used to walk into a lot of different houses of worship. And that's what is considered you need to do. Not to go there to pray, but you have to go in for one thing or another. And that's a reality in politics, as you know from all the scenes you watch in communities.
Yeah, I think, look, it's hard for people, I think, in certain ways to understand this. We could have a whole longer conversation about how this is decayed on both the left and the right. But the notion that you would be a proud minority, a proud American, understanding those two to be inextricably linked, and to see the sort of more particularistic expressions of who you were in the public space as inviting other people to be a part of that as well. The line, if you saw it quoted in the movie from the convention acceptance speech, which was when a barrier falls for for one group, a door is open wider for all other Americans. That was the Reverend Jesse Jackson gave him that line. And he integrated that into his speech. And I remember when he heard that line, how much it resonated with him. He said, yes, that's exactly how I feel. I'm not just trying to get a space that's better for Jews. It's the type of America that lets a Jew be proud in the public square is going to be an America that can and should be better for everyone. That is what he believed, right, with every fiber of his being. But it was also about this investment in the American story and in integrating with other people and delighting on connections with people of other faiths. And it was just an organic, integrated vision for him.
And that's why what's currently going on is striking to us. And he began not to believe it and then want to explore and understand. And for someone, we all have backgrounds, and we can all point to different things in our backgrounds. And to me, I don't know, unfortunately, being, someone who was born in Prague, and my parents, that whole went through, my mother Auschwitz, Dachau, my father slave labor camp. Well, when I see that, I think back about the history of the earlier Nazism and how it began to change, and its negative hatred toward Judaism slowly, and where that ended up. So as a Jew, I'm concerned about what I see today. And, I used to say to Joey, I would joke to say, express concern before this time, because he didn't live to see this time. And he would say, it's going to be okay, it's different, we're here, And now, today, he's not there to say anything different, but it's a different time. And we have to pray that we go back to being Americans, that we can be, and respectful towards each other.
If you want to applaud. My final question. Joe is a proud Jew and a proud American. 2026 is a fraught moment for the Jewish community, but it's also the 250th anniversary of the United States. So if Joe were alive today, what would his message be to the next generation of Jewish Americans? And what would his message be to all Americans?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. In some ways, like his voice in my head of what am I trying to hear from him. And there are a few things I feel like distill out from what he cared about and were really important. The first thing, I don't know how we educate towards this, but I think a fundamental axiom for him was the vast majority of people are decent. The vast majority of people are decent. That is the way he went through the world. So it wasn't, there's some people who are not decent, right? But you go around society and the average person you see on the street, that was his conviction. That was almost like a ground norm that I think enabled so many other things. So that was one thing, and we need some kind of civic and social education to bring that back. The second thing is when he encountered someone with different beliefs, deeply differently held beliefs from him, he did not feel he had found an enemy. He felt he had found a fellow traveler in conviction. Right? In other words, you could recognize, oh, that person cares about something. I know what it's like to care about something. I know when I care about something, it's actually motivated by some deeply held value. They must have some deeply held value. So now my work is to figure out, is there any Venn diagram between the two of us? Can I understand what they care about? Is there a way in which there's some integration between their view and my view? That notion that when you find that 40% of the population thinks the exact opposite of you, do you only see 40% of the people who you wish would go away? Or look at that, we got 40% of the people that are agitated about something and care about it. Maybe there's something to work with there. That I feel like was the second thing. And the third, which you heard in the film, but just to reiterate it, because I think it was such a central worldview for him, and I think so needed today. No party or ideology has a monopoly on wisdom. He just really believed that. It was that you would find wisdom and instincts that could be productive essentially across the political spectrum. Then the job, if you were on one side of that, was to figure out, okay, what do I do with that? What do I mine that for? But this is, you talk about the narrowness and what you're describing uncharitably and probably accurately as everyone getting stupider, is the inability to see wisdom in lots of different corners. Yeah.
The ability to disagree without demonization is the essence of liberal democracy, and Joe embodied it at every phase of his life. And just to thank you for sharing with the rest of us the legacy of one of the greatest public servants.